I have a handful of slides here I want to share with you, and then we're going to dive into some real code. And it's about building app management tools using the Spring Boot platform. Well, now you've done it. You went and built the perfect application. Now everybody loves it. Your team loves it because you architected it well. You used good practices, good tools, et cetera, like that. The customer really loves it, and the side effect of that is your manager loves it because you're bringing in a lot of new business and a lot of revenues. So what can you expect as the outcome of that? Are you going to receive a promotion and climb the ladder? Maybe you're going to get a good pay raise? I think we know the answer to that one. No, you're not. Instead, you get to support the app in ops. So this is a time when you'll probably have to, your manager may ask you to go out to the sysadmins or the DevOps team and help support it in deployment and add some new support tools and things like that. So let's compare two different things. The tool set that you used to build the app with, what kind of things did you use? Well, you probably used Java or Groovy, assuming the audience is probably tuned into this webinar. I'm assuming you used some Spring, hopefully the new Spring Boot that's been really hot and raging, Apache Tomcat, various other parts of the Spring Tomcat stack. If you built some, a web-based front end, you're certainly using HTML, JavaScript, CSS3, all that goodness. And probably you're using Maven or Gradle. Stats showed like 85% of Java projects use Maven, and Gradle's coming in second. It's gaining a lot of popularity. However, when you go over and start building some tools to support your app and to manage it and gather metrics and do all kinds of that stuff, what kind of tools do you hear people using there? Now, often you hear about different shell scripting tools, and here I kind of have a joke that there's almost a shell for every letter of the alphabet available. If you're a test-bit and script junkie like myself, you may use tools like Python or Tickle, TK, and Expect. Some of you might use things like Ruby. There's some older tools like Perl or T-SQL for writing tools and various support scripts. And, basically just about any kind of scripting language that you can imagine. I've seen proprietary tools that came with certain stacks that I was able to utilize in my career. So what does this amount to if you need to do something like connect to Facebook? You need your tool to access Facebook and do something, or look at Twitter or GitHub. In this presentation, we're going to look at a support tool that actually taps into GitHub. What if you need your tool set to connect to RabbitMQ? Perhaps your main production application is using that RabbitMQ broker, and which has had a recent study showing 1 million messages a second of steady processing, and you want to write a support script to tap into some of that and gather some metric data. What if you want to connect into the database that the main app is running against? Or what if you need to, if you're not using RabbitMQ, perhaps you're using JMS messaging and you want to hook into some of that and measure flow or things like that. Or potentially do you want to reuse part of your app's modules? Well, if you're using something like Python, you have to go learn a different library, a different, component to access all these features. You may not even be able to access something like JMS through these tools unless you're going to use JPython or Jython. So it's a struggle with that. And so, my question I ask, and we're going to explore in this webinar, is why not use the same set of tools for both? And my reaction to that would be, I think that would be totally awesome. Being able to write my tools with Java, or especially the deft programming language of Groovy, is very appealing. If I'm able to use Spring plus Tomcat for both in real simple and clear-cut ways, that would be stupendous. And then we're also going to dig in and look at Spring Boot CLI tool, and then finally some, HTML and all of its supported features. So to do that, we're going to go visit a few apps. There's a couple apps that I put together to help support stuff. Last summer, over the span of about 3 or 4 months, Roy Clarkson, Craig Walls, and myself wrote about 50 or so getting started guides that are now at Spring's website. Each of those Getting Started Guides is hosted on a separate GitHub repository, and we've encouraged people, if you spot a bug in the code, if you spot a typo, please go and open an issue at that GitHub repository so we can track it down. Well, the idea of navigating 50 different GitHub repository sets of issues is a nightmare, and we quickly ran into that as, nothing is perfect, and we had to start tracking it. So I'm going to go open up my browser here and show you a tool that we built called Issue Aggregator. And here what we have is, this is a little app that I wrote, or a support script, if you will, and its job is to go visit all the guides that we have on GitHub and look up all their open issues. And actually now we have over 60 guides. This is not bad for the number of open issues against the guides. So, but periodically, maybe about every 2 weeks, I want to come in and try to clean up some of the outstanding issues to make it better. And so this is much faster than trying to go to something like this. I'm having to go navigate to each guide, go navigate to each of the issues, and check, are there any issues here? So why don't we go open up this app that I built called Issue Aggregator and take a look at it. I'm going to zoom it in here so it's a little more readable. So what this is if I just do a quick scroll through, it's really not a lot of code. Let me walk through the bits of it here. This is a Groovy file. At the top, I've put it into a package. We're making use of Groovy Grape, which lets us pull in dependencies. And what this does is this says, I don't need a build file. I don't need a project structure. I can just write a single file, and I have an app. And in this case, we're going to use Spring Social GitHub and JSoup. And we'll see why a little down further. I have a few import statements. The fact that I'm using Spring Boot CLI saves me from a lot of the import statements that I might need, such as Spring MVC or Jackson. I don't need to use those import statements because Boot will provide them for me automatically. And that's what happens. Down here you can see I'm pulling in some other dependencies using the shorthand notation that Boot provides. We're going to have the time leaf templates, and Spring Web components, and Jackson for data binding. Now this class, which I can just almost squeeze into a page here, is called Issue Aggregator. In fact, it's a Spring MVC controller, and I also have it use the Groovy @log annotation, so I can have a logger embedded inside this code automatically without having to set it up. Now, two things that you have to have in order to connect to GitHub and look up open issues is you actually need to have an access token. This is an OAuth password that you have to configure. And later on after the webinar, if you go visit the project, which I'll show you, it has all the steps on how to create your own token. We also need to tell it which particular organization we want it to look at. And by default, it's going to look at Spring Guides. Here we've configured a bean. We're creating a new GitHub template, and we're plugging in the GitHub token value, or in other words, our password. And because I actually want to use the template right here in this code, I need to auto-wire and grab an instance of it. Now, this method right here is sort of the gold of the whole thing, of what it does. It's fed a list of repository names, basically strings. So what it does is it's going to iterate over them and generate and collect them together. And for each repository, it's going to take the GitHub template, grab the repo operations, and look up issues for that organization and repository. And what it's going to do, it's going to apply a filter right here. It's going to filter out and only grab the ones that are open. After that, I just put a little polish and had it sort by the number of the item, and then finally transform it into, have each entry transformed into a tiny dictionary with both the repository name and the GitHub issue itself. And the issue is a Spring Social GitHub issue, and the fact that the issue itself doesn't hold the repository name is why I needed to grab it and put it here. Now, all that stuff, I'm going to do a quick check and say if it is more than, if it's not empty, then flatten it out into a simple list for me to process. Now, down here is where I actually have a Spring MVC route mapped. I'm going to map it to the root page here. And what it's going to do, it's going to go connect with JSoup to spring.io/guides. Let's go pull that up and look at what that page is. This is where you can go and find the list of all the guides that we've built. And essentially, it's going to go scan each of them. If I go view this on the back side, right here, I happen to be looking at A class guide title with the href here. This is the path to the guide that I'm interested in. So if I go back to the code, what I've done here is I'll fetch that entire page, and the idea is I want to go grab every one of those so that I can dynamically pick up all the guides that are currently out there. And what JSoup does is it's a library, a Java library that provides a jQuery-like selector syntax. I can do select, and I'm looking for that a.guide title token. Now inside it, I have a filter. I do not want any of the entries that were actually tutorials. Instead, this app is focused on just managing the guides. And then once I have that filtered list, I'm going to do a transformation. Basically, I need to take that href value that we had. Here it had /guide/gs/scheduling-tasks. I want to take the href. I'm going to subtract out /guide/gx that was in the front of the string, and I'm going to subtract the slash at the end of the string, and then I'm going to prefix it with GS. So this is where you get to tap your Groovy magic and use, what scripting tools have. If you were to write this in Java, I feel like this would be a pain in the neck to try to put together this kind of string operation. But with Groovy, it's a piece of cake. And then finally, what I'm going to do is I'll have built up this array of repository issues, and I'm going to put them into my Spring MVC model and return back and tell it to render the home view. If I go take a peek at that, let me try that. Here we go. Now this is a web page that I've built, and we're not going to walk through every line, but if you've done any web development, you may recognize that this is generally a Twitter Bootstrap CSS layout. And what I've actually done is, for styling, I went and grabbed the style sheets directly right off of spring.io so that it has a familiar look and feel for managing this stuff. If I scroll down here to where the content is, it's basically a giant table structure that I have. And right in the center of it is where I'm going to actually iterate over all those issues. Now, this is a time leaf template. This is not a JSP because I find JSPs unwieldy and hard to manage. And I've been able to get a lot more efficiently written templates and stuff using time leaf. So here I'm going to iterate over each issue, and then I'm going to basically extract the name of the repository. And then I'm going to also grab the issue and then look up its HTML URL address so you can hyperlink jump to it. And then finally, I'm going to print up, who's it assigned to, and if it's not assigned to anybody, then just leave it empty, or leave it as unassigned. And then finally, what's the title of the issue? And with all that, basically, it lets me render this here. So from this app, I can quickly look and see, well, there's 3 open issues against the Getting Started Guide for Messaging Redis. If I click here, that's GitHub's Helios record for it, and I can quickly navigate to the issue and start to read it and digest it and figure out how to solve it. So, to me, putting together that tiny amount of code, which, zoomed in is like barely fits, it's a page and a half of code that lets me basically do my job a lot easier and come in, clean up issues. So that's our first example, and this is what I call issue aggregator. And you can actually see the code yourself if you want to over my GitHub repository. So if you go visit here, you can see it and get all the information here about how to set it up. It shows you how to set up a GitHub token, how to run it from the command line, and even how to upload it to Cloud Foundry, even though I think those documents have gotten a little bit out of date. Now there's another tool that I built also, which we want to keep our eye on. Is back up here, and I'm going to go visit one of the guides here. And this is something if you've been able to see the guides since we released them last year, hopefully they've been really handy for you to do stuff. But it tells you how to solve a problem. But you may not have noticed in the right-hand corner that we have an icon that shows that the build is passing. If I click on that icon, it actually takes me to drone.io, which is a CI server solution out on the web. And we actually have a CI job for every guide out there. And the idea is if we do something to the code and it breaks it, we want to know about it. So here I'm looking at one particular guide. I can go look at their interface and see all the guides that we have and see that they're all what their status is. And if I scroll and scroll and scroll and keep scrolling, I can finally see what the status of all of them are. And one of them's red, so we need to go address it. But this is an incredibly inefficient use of real estate on the screen for such a large volume. So I had an idea of why not do the same tactic I did and create something called a drone aggregator. I can get a more efficient. Oh, there's that red one there. I can get a tighter view of it at a glance to see what the status of all the guides are. For each one of these, there's a hyperlink here where I can easily navigate to the guide itself if I want to look at it, or I can see where the icon is. I can click on that and navigate to the drone job. So both these things help me manage the stuff, and I can actually jump. I even put hyperlinks so that I can jump between both of these apps that I have. Now let's go look at the code for drone aggregator and see what that looks like. Let me zoom it up here. Again, we're going to use JSoup. We're going to have Timeleaf, and actually, that's it. That's the whole app right there. It's going to do the same trick. It's going to connect. It's going to use JSoup and connect and look up all the names of the guides. This way, it dynamically will update the page as we publish new guides, and I don't have to go update this app. Just add a new guide to it. It's going to do pretty much the same query to get the list of guides and filter out all the tutorials. This time the transformation is slightly different. We're doing the same string trickery to go extract out the actual name of the guide as it appears. But in this sense, we're not going to GitHub. We don't need Spring Social GitHub because we're not looking up the issues on GitHub. Instead, we're basically building two links for every project, one to go to the guide and one to go to its drone CI job. So in that case, I want to grab the href, and I'm also going to grab the text of the title to put underneath it. And then finally, I'm going to take that information and I'm going to put it into my Spring MVC model object. Now, in this case, what I want to do is I wanted to use more of Groovy's awesome collection support and basically take an entire list of guides and chunk it up into chunks of 4 guides per row. And this is through its collate operation, and return the home view. And so all this maps onto our to the slash route. If I go pull that up, this will look suspiciously just like the other one. Again, I'm using the same styling sheet from Spring.io itself, just to give it a similar look and feel. You saw me navigating on the nav bar up at the top. This lets me hop over to Issue Aggregator, and Issue Aggregator lets me hop back to Drone Aggregator. Down here, I build up a similar table. In this case, for each row that I build, I'm going to take the chunks and divvy it up into a single chunk. And then now I need to make a separate divisional element. So I'm going to iterate over the chunk and get each individual guide. Now, again, this is where I'm using Timeleaf as my templating engine instead of JSP. It may take a little bit of ramp-up time to get the hang of being able to assemble strings, but here I'm basically going to meld together Spring.io with the href, which would be the name of the guide to go to, and I'm going to plug it in with the title of it. Now down below, I need an alternate string where I'm going to construct a go to drone.io into the Spring guides and put the name of the guide and then take me to the latest job or show me the latest, or that will link me to the latest job. And inside it, I'm going to have an image object. And in this case, I'm going to link into the image that we show on the guide itself. It's the same image, this status.png file. And here's where I ran out of options. I wanted to be able to potentially, like, let me add up and let me put an alert right at the top of the page that says, hey, there's a guide down, go check it out. Unfortunately, they use the same image icon, status.png, whether it's red or green or, up or down. So I can show it on the screen, but I can't read that. It's a visual clue. But in a nutshell, you can go look at this code too. Let me back up here and show you where it is on GitHub. Under my GitHub repository here for drone aggregator. And, this is all about how to slap together a quick tool to overcome a current situation. I could interact with the people developing drone and ask them to change their interface, but they may, I don't have time to do that, and they may have differing reasons why they want to keep it the way it is. So I can mash up their data and include my own links to it. And here you can you can check out the code and repurpose it for your own needs. Now I'm going to show one more quick example before we do our coding exercise. I've actually been writing a book recently called Learning Spring Boot, and for that, part of it is I have a lot of these console outputs that you see, like basically in parts of the code, parts of the book, I want to put this output to show you. Well, this output is way too wide to put into a book, so I wanted to basically take all this stuff, but let me strip out this chunk from the output on a line-by-line basis. And if this line exceeds 80 characters, trim it down and put an ellipsis on it. So what I did was instead of reaching for Python, a tool I've used for years, I instead reached for Spring Boot and Groovy to write this. And I basically call it clean up boot console output. What this script is doing is that it implements Spring Boot's command line runner. So this is a command line interface. This doesn't have a web layer to it. And this means I have to implement the run method. Basically going to do is going to parse the Java system.in property and iterate over it line by line. I have this line in order that I can extract the timestamp. It's a regular expression to parse the timestamp at the beginning of a line if it is a timestamp. And if so, based on the size of it, if it's over 80 characters, then I'm just going to trim it back to 77 characters and put 3 dots at the end. Otherwise, I'll just print out the whole line. And if it's not a timestamp at all, then I'm going to trim it down and just look at the 80 characters and trim it out. I'm going to go test that. So I've gotten. Let me pick a bigger fragment. Okay, so here's like an output that I captured, and this just doesn't fit on the screen, but I wrote this little script. So when I run it through here, it's going to launch the Spring Boot CLI, and here it's going to take the input of that file and run it through my trimmer, and it's going to cut it down, and it'll be no more than 80 characters wide, and then I can take that text and paste it into my manuscript. Now, they just recently released this morning Spring Boot 1.1.4, and they added a feature that I asked for. It may not be really big on everybody's plate, but it's important to me. Is they added the quiet flag. So when you run the script, you can now turn on the quiet flag, and it will not print out all this extra logging output from Spring Boot itself. See, when it comes to writing scripts, all I want is what the script itself is outputting, which is just the stuff right here. So I'm eager to upgrade to that. So here's where I've been able to go write some little tools to support myself. Now, the last tool we're going to look at today is one I call Spring Monitor. I want to describe a scenario that I actually worked on in the past. We had a system that would gather weather data And it would gather it in periodic cycles, like lightning data would collect every 30 seconds, and Doppler radar data would collect every 2 minutes. And my job was to take the data files and move them to the other weather stations automatically. But I would always log every time I processed a data file, and I discovered later on down the road that I could write a script to pull the log files and detect, well, lightning data is supposed to be every 30 seconds, but I haven't seen one for 2 minutes. And so I would build a screen that would turn red when that happened, and it would tip me off and I needed to go fix a process. So what I'm going to pull up here is this is going to simulate a production app. Imagine this is the perfect app that you just built, and its job is to collect things like lightning data. Now, this is a Spring Boot CLI app, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, a giant monolithic production app that you built. For demonstration purposes, it's using Spring's scheduling support, and it's scheduled to do this every 5 seconds. It will basically, all it's going to do is going to log out a message and say simulated activity. And down here, I have another job that happens every 3 seconds, and it's going to generate a weather forecast every 3 seconds. Now, these numbers are made up for demo purposes, but let me go run it to give you an idea what this looks like. Now, if I just I run my app here, what it's going to start doing over on the right-hand side of the screen, it's printing out, we see lightning data, weather forecast, and it's logging its traffic, and it also has a timestamp on the left-hand side. And what I'm interested in is being able to grab the timestamp and compare it to now to see if the data's gone out of date. However, I need to do one extra step, and that's actually I want to drop it into a log file. So in this case, it's going to print it to the console, and it's going to generate a log file for me to process. So I'm going to let that run in the background, and now let's look at the monitor app, this support app that I want to build. So the purpose of this app is I want to go monitor the log file. I want to detect if it's either currently generating data and meaning the system is in a good state, or if it has stopped generating data, meaning it's switched to a bad state and tip somebody off. So to do this, this app has 4 components in it. I'm not going to go into details about the import statements. These are basically the imports that I need to use this stuff down here. The first chunk I want to talk about is the monitor. Basically, I was trying to figure out a way to pull a log file and tail as new lines got added to it. And it occurred to me that perhaps Spring Integration had that ability. So I called up Gary Russell, who's the lead for Spring Integration, and we chatted for about 5 minutes about this. And he told me, all you need is this little guy here, OS Delegating File Tailing Message Producer. You create an instance, you configure the file it's going to watch, and here I'm pointing it at sim.log, which is being generated as we speak, and you also configure its output channel. So here I'm pointing it at tail channel, which is a Spring Integration direct channel. And then I return this bean to get picked up by the application context. So all this class's job is to monitor for new lines being added to the log files, and as they happen, publish them to a Spring Integration channel. Now downstream, I have another thing, a monitor service. I'm going to kind of jump around a bit and not try to make it too confusing here to follow our flow of action here. Now, we previously were publishing new lines of the log file into tail channel. On the other end of that, I have a method here that's marked up as a Spring Integration Service Activator, and it is listening on tail channel. And it will handle basically what it gets handed is the payload of the message, which is that line of data. And using a little groovy string magic, I'm going to test it and say, does it contain that token of lightning data? If so, I want to calculate the timestamp that's on the left-hand side of that string. In this case, this app, I'm using JotaTime, not the Java standard time APIs, because they're just so much easier to work with. So here I'll keep parsing it. Every time I get a new message, this latest value will update and keep updating its timestamp. Now, in a separate thread of action, I am using Spring's scheduling support, and I have a scheduled task over here that runs every 5 seconds. It's going to do a check. it's going to do, it's going to calculate what the current timestamp is, and then it's going to calculate the difference between now and when the latest piece of lightning data was read in from the log file. And it says that if it's been more than 10 seconds, we need to generate an alert, flag it as severity bad, and we're going to publish it. We're going to convert and send it out to topic status. If the duration's been less than 10 seconds, it's going to say, well, now it's good, and send it to the same topic. Now, you may be wondering, what is topic status? What is this? What kind of template is this? If I scroll back, I can see we have a SIMP messaging template. And SIMP messaging template is from the Spring Framework's WebSocket support layer. In this sense, it's basically we have a I think that's Spring integration. We have some WebSocket support. So what we're going to do is publish these messages to a WebSocket, and later on we will have a web layer that hooks into it and can get messages pushed out to it dynamically. Now, some of this other stuff that I have in here, like task scheduler and configure tasks, this deals with the fact that when you have more than one component in the app context that is involved with task scheduling, Spring Framework cannot resolve that for you. So you have to figure out how to configure it. And this essentially tells WebSocket and the schedule annotations to both use the same task scheduler. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to the bottom here and then work my way up, because we're talking about pushing a message out over a WebSocket. This last class is my WebSocket config. If you actually go to the spring.io/guide, and if you search for WebSocket, you'll find a guide that actually walks you through how to set up WebSockets, and it even talks about the STOMP messaging protocol, which I'll mention here further on. So essentially, I use that guide to help me write this piece of code here. We're going to use we're going to use Groovy Grape and pull in. We need some STOMP WebSocket support in the browser, and we need some sock.js, which sock.js provides a graceful fallback in case the browser doesn't have WebSocket support. It can fall back and still provide the same effect. And in this case, I'm basically configuring the thing to talk. The broker is geared to talk to anything on /topic. So you can have one channel, you can have 50 different channels. Essentially, it's just part of its protocol. Now it's geared here, /app is the destination. If the web wants to push something to the server side, the server is listening at /app. That's where I can find this material. And then down here, there's some configuration and to tell it to not only register a WebSocket, but also include sock.js fallback support should the situation call for it. And you can find more detailed description about what all these settings mean in the Getting Started guide that I just pulled up. I'm going to go back here and show the last two bits are. Here I have basically a simple Spring MVC controller, and I'm going to return back at the slash route. I'm going to look up the index template, and then which should have my connection code. And then finally I have a tiny little Pojo here, which just that's the definition of alarm, which has the severity and description. Now that's bigger than the other samples are, but it contains a power-packed bunch of functionality in it. Now, the whole time I've had my simulator running, it's been generating stuff, but now I think it's time to run the monitor tool that we just walked through. So we're going to fire it up. And let's go to the browser here. Let's see, localhost. Refresh it. So here we got a message displayed and defaults to 0. As more traffic happens, we can expect this page to dynamically update. Let's see, so far it's still been 0 seconds. The timing on the see, there's something running in the background. Oh, let me see. Let me restart it here. Make sure I don't have a lingering page open here on my spots. Okay, let's see. I just needed to kind of refresh everything. So right now, it's good.
Proof that it's a live demo, right?
Yes. No demo is complete without failures. Okay, well,
exactly.
Speaking of failures, well, let's go kill the simulator. Let's imagine the production system died a sad death, and but nobody was there to see it because nobody was looking at the console. So here it increments from 4 to 9 seconds. And now it goes to 14 seconds, and it's bad. And so the idea is this could be the screen on your overhead projector in the ops center, and right as the customer's visiting, it turns red. And the whole thing is you can say, hey, we're on top of it. And, you got your floor team able to rush around and figure out what's going wrong. They patch the system, they swap out a server, and they fire it back up. And without having with my hands away from the keyboard, it goes back to green status, and everything's good. So, this right here, basically I grabbed a lot of different components and put them together. And what I enjoyed about it is well, I know what Spring integration does, and I know how to create some simple POJOs to contain my data, and I like the alarm record, and I know how to build some Spring MVC pages. And now we've got WebSocket support with some, and I was able to figure out how to use that through our guides, that I could roll it all together and build a support tool with the tool set that I already know. And I wasn't thinking in the terms of, I need a build file. Am I going to use Gradle? Am I going to use Maven? I didn't need to use either of them to do this. And I was able to, do some string manipulation, parlor magic using Groovy. If I tried to write that in Java, I'd be pulling my hair out. So what I'm going to do is let's flip back here and look at some of these things. And, what this emphasizes, what your options are, maybe you're starting to realize this is that, well, I built a support tool, but if the support tool gets enough love and attention and you build it up, it may actually become a microservice. It might join the suite of production tools and basically be pulled under the umbrella. And people may essentially view it as part of the app. I saw a slide the other day that showed monolithic apps and microservices, and strangely enough, it had all the same wheels at the center. It was just whether there was one big box around all of it or whether they were all separate processes. But it's the same fundamental concept that it's a bunch of services working together to support the system. To review, the benefit here with using Spring Boot is that, I get to build tools faster. If I'm sitting in the Ops Center, I'm not working on the perfect app, so I want something that's going to help me speed up my development time. I definitely know that I'm using a proven stack when you look at the mass adoption of the Spring framework and you look at the popularity and the rise of Apache Tomcat. And the download rates on things like Spring Boot have been phenomenal. To top it off, these are products that are supported by a solid team. I don't know how many years Tomcat has been out, but that's well developed. The Spring team is there to always crank out new rock solid code. And the big message here is I get to finish writing these support tools sooner. So when I do that, I get to go back to my daytime job and build more of those perfect apps, or hope I can see if lightning will strike twice. So
we've got a bunch of good questions teed up.
Okay.
So let's see. First one, Jonathan asks, he was curious when the release date on that Learning Spring Boot book that you were working on. He's curious when you were thinking, what time frame you were thinking about that, releasing that.
They tell me the tentative date for that would be around November. know if this is a cheap shot, but you can monitor. I try to blog about it pretty often, and if you go to my personal blog site, I don't know how readable that is. I have a category you can track the progress on it, but it's on a tight turnaround. You're not going to have to wait 2 years for this book to come out.
Cool.
Some peeks at it and stuff like that. But so hopefully by the time I was hoping they would have it done by spring 1 so I could be handing out the pre-copies, but unfortunately that's not the case.
No. Oh well. Well, we'll just have to hand out free copies of the spring data book. Let's see. Okay. Another question from Daniel, and he asks, is it possible to parameterize the @scheduled annotation without having to declare bean in XML for it? It takes a cron expression, but it must be determined at compile time. I'd like to know if I can use an expression defined in a config file.
I'm not sure about that one. That's a very good question. Where did I have the?
And while you're there, a very quick question. Someone was saying, hey, what were you using to launch those app.groovy files? The Spring shell? And I responded by saying it was the boot command line interface, which I believe it is. Is that right?
Yeah, this is, I'm going to zoom this up a little. Oops, that's not what I meant. Yeah, I happen to actually be using a GVM. We have
GVM, okay.
Well, I'm using GVM as the means to install what's called the Spring Boot tool, and the name of the actual command is called Spring. But there's also a homebrew recipe. If you want to, you can do brew install Spring Boot. I should say it's brew tap. I think it's if I could type it. Pivotal tap. And then brew. This is on a Mac. Brew install Spring Boot. The brew is a popular package manager for the Mac, but GVM is on a lot of platforms. So if you install GVM, I went to the wrong site. No wait. GVMtool.net. Okay, I was wondering what the typo on that was.
There you go.
This is a popular tool in the Groovy community because you can manage lots. This is a listing of the products that you can get through it, and as new releases of these tools come out, your GVM will update, and you can download and install them. Things like Grails, Groovy, Gradle, and usually within 24 hours of a new Spring Boot release, they get the CLI on here. Now this is not the place to get the jar files if you're using if you're building a Spring Boot application and using Maven or Gradle to get the boot libraries. This is to get the Spring Boot CLI app, and they list on where the supported platforms it has. But
gotcha. And so you are in fact using the Spring Boot CLI to launch these, the .app files,
exactly.
Groovy files. Excuse me.
Yeah, and okay. what it comes loaded with a ton of features, and I'm using the run because this is letting me prototype and run stuff, but it actually has the capability to take your tool and turn it into an executable jar file. So once you hammer out your support app, you can turn it into an executable jar file, stick it on a thumb drive, and carry it out to your ops center and deploy it wherever you find a JVM.
Nice. Excellent. Okay, so back to Daniel's question about the parameterized @schedule annotation. Do you want me to repeat the question real quick? Sorry, I didn't mean to take it.
I think your question was: Is it possible to parameterize this? I don't know.
He wants to use an expression. He wants to use an expression to find it in a config file. Yeah,
I don't know that one. I don't think they talk about that in the guide. We have one guide that talks about scheduling tasks. I don't remember that being mentioned as an option. We may have to take an action to try to answer that. Trying to think somewhere around here. We've got a hyperlink. Here they talk about it talks about 3 options on scheduling. You can have fixed rate, fixed delay, or cron expressions. And it takes you right to the Spring Java docs that talk about it, but we have to ping either Jurgen or Dave Sire to ask him if it's injectable from a app property file, because that would be very convenient in my book. But
Daniel, maybe just follow Greg on Twitter, and you guys can link up once we figure out the answer in detail to that. Let's see. I think yes. Christopher Smith, thank you very much for popping up the GVM tool. I just didn't see that before. Okay. Let's see. So Christopher, by the way, also comments and says, hey, the source for the handler directly parses the annotation values, cron expression, no Spring expression language. FYI. So, cool. Got some discussion going on here. Another guy, Ben, is saying that you can parameterize the con value like anything else with a spell expression from properties. So it sounds like this one's on the bubble. Let's get the official word from Dave and of course Jurgen, and gentlemen, just follow Twitter, follow Greg on Twitter, and he'll post the answer so that you'll see it. Otherwise, you can get in touch with Greg via the various methods that you see here on this slide. And I just want to take this opportunity to let you know that this is being recorded. If you want to share it with your colleagues, pass it around the office. We will be posting it on YouTube as always. And if you want to get notified when that is available, just grab, go to either spring.io/blog to subscribe to the Atom feed, or you can go to spring.io/video if you just want the videos, because that's the YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel there. If you subscribe to the blog, though, you'll get a bunch of other great content. Obviously, all the engineering blogs, Spring One session replays, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, release news, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of value there if you're interested to check it out. Great. So just want to invite you to join some of our upcoming webinars. We've got some cool stuff coming up this month as well, and we will be taking a break in the month of August for the summer holiday. So there won't be any webinars in August, but please do come back and join us. We are going to be having a number of webinars in the next couple weeks here. One of them, if you've never heard of this guy, he's really good. His name is Michael Pluth. He's going to be talking about how he makes the case for Spring to his clients. He's an independent consultant. He's kind of out there in the speaker circuit a lot, and that's on July 22nd. So I'm not going to go so far as to say as it's the business case for Spring, but he really makes a great technology. Gives you some good ammunition on how to make the tech case for Spring, with a couple business points kind of sprinkled in there. So that's on July 22nd. On July 15th. From the absolutely insane project files, these poor guys, Casey and Phil, got tasked with building a shopping cart in 24 hours using Spring, and they actually pulled it off. So if you just like reading these sort of sadistic stories of poor people who get tasked with ridiculous requirements and then actually pull it out with Spring for the win, this is kind of a war story from the field here. Might be of interest to you. Also on July 29th, we're going to have Russ Danner from Crafter Software talking about content management on web and mobile using Spring and Groovy. And then, like I said, we'll be taking August off. With that, just want to kick it back to you, Greg. Any kind of closing comments before we sign off? It doesn't look like there's any more questions from our attendees at the moment.
Well, I just want to encourage anybody that I've found that this platform of development really has the sizzle to it that I look for when a manager comes to me and says, "Hey, can you prototype something and come back to me in 24 hours and give me a report on it, and I can go try something out. I can tinker with it, and I don't have to deal with a lot of overhead. And I can find something and say, hey, I think that, this may be the answer you're looking for, or this may be the tool you're looking for. And down the road, I can polish it up and actually maybe become part of the app. I don't have this dichotomy of, well, I built a quick prototype in Python, but now I need to migrate it into Java to add it to the app, or I need to tell the DevOps team they now need to deal with Python and Java. Instead, with one cohesive ecosystem here, I can pull off some crafty support features.
And by basing it on Spring Boot, even though Spring Boot is relatively new, its heritage is quite mature, and we're running it in production ourselves, actually, with our DevOps team, on the Spring.io website, which gets quite a lot of traffic, in the millions of unique visitors per month. So not a rinky-dink amount of traffic or a rinky-dink application by any means. And something that our customers are actually using already in production at large companies. So Boot's a good foundation for that purpose. Greg, thanks a lot. Great talk, and I think this is very cool, especially for kind of people who are looking at microservices for how to build these kind of lightweight, monitoring and management tools super quick and with not a lot of code. So pretty impressive. Thank you very much. All right, everyone. See you next time. Hope to see you at one of the webinars in the future. Have a great day, and thanks for your time and attention. Bye, everybody.